Hey everyone, today I have Christiane with me. She is a virtual school teacher at a public elementary school called Florida Virtual School. Today she's going to talk about her experience being a virtual teacher and her recommendations for students who are now distance learning, her recommendations for teachers, and answering some questions that a lot of parents have about virtual school. Are you ready to get started?
Yes, I'm ready.
Great. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background in teaching?
So I've been teaching for 7 years. I worked 5 years brick and mortar at a public Title I school, meaning most students there received free or reduced lunch. And then the last 2 years, I actually worked for a Title I public school that is online for Florida Virtual School. So all my experience has been primarily with Title I schools, but very different between the brick and mortar and virtual setting.
Gotcha. Okay, so it seems like resources and funding is a major problem in brick and mortar schools. I think that's a very common problem across the United States. What challenges have you seen at the virtual school that are different than the challenges you've seen in the brick and mortar school?
Well, some of the biggest challenges are just really making sure that the students are showing up to class time, even though it's virtual, and completing those assignments. So when you think brick and mortar, the teacher is there with the students and able to make sure that they're getting those assignments done in class and practicing. But when they're at home, I really don't have a way to check in to make sure that they're completing them on their own. Sometimes siblings are helping, or parents might be helping too much or too little. I see both sides of that. And so those seem to be the biggest challenges, just keeping that academic integrity throughout the school year for them.
I see. So having the support at home is an important part of the success for a student who's participating in distance learning.
Yes, that's something to very much consider is if you are doing the virtual school, you need to just have that support at home. And really, once the students get started and you've enabled them to be able to complete things, they'll be able to do them on their own. And once you teach them those steps, but initially, there really needs to be a lot of parent support to get them on how to submit assignments, how to log into class time, when to meet their teacher for one-on-one support. And then from there, it becomes less and less on the parents.
Okay, so how has your experience with parents been at virtual school compared to brick and mortar school?
So actually, virtually, I communicate with my parents a lot more than I did brick and mortar. Usually, brick and mortar, you see the parents for open house and conference nights. But with virtually, I am communicating with the parents, whether it's text or email, and then also through video conferencing, phone calls, all the time. We're giving monthly updates to the parents. And the other great thing about virtual is the parents are seeing their grades almost instantly. And so if they notice something of concern, they're able to reach out to me right away to find out, why did my child get a D on this assignment and they've been getting A's? Like, what was that miscommunication in there? And we can quickly catch the students and help them if they were missing something in multiplication or division. And then I've noticed the same on my end. If I notice a student is always getting A's and B's and I know where they got a D on an assignment, I can reach out to the parent to let them know, because they might say, oh, that's because they did it without, they just jumped into it, or maybe they went out of order in a module. And we can have that open communication, which brick and mortar, it didn't happen as much with the parents.
Okay, so how are you communicating with the parents? Is this through email, phone, text messages?
Yeah, so I was just saying that I communicate a lot with them through text. I set up Personally, we set up a for virtual Google Voice account, so that way it keeps that separation still. They don't have my personal number, but I do have a Google Voice number set up, and they can text and call during my working hours, and then also email. So a lot of times, if I have free time and they send me a text, I can reply to them instantly. Or if it's something I think that's going to take a lot of time and I might have some meetings coming up, then I can schedule that with them. But if it's something they need help with submissions or how to find something, I've had parents log into something like Zoom, and I can screen share with them and show them how to access things that they might not be able to understand completely through a phone call or, through a text message. So there's lots of ways to communicate.
Okay, interesting. So how does your communication with parents while teaching at virtual school compare to when you were teaching at brick and mortar?
So similar to what we were just talking about before, I communicate with the parents a lot more because we have that open communication, where before it was they were more, they were at work during the day and we're with the students during the day. So I couldn't just answer a parent text in the middle of a day or a parent email. I might not see that email for 8 to 12 hours. Sometimes if I had a meeting right after work in brick and mortar, I might not see it to the next day. So they're getting faster communication virtually.
Okay, so about how many times do you think you would communicate with a parent at brick and mortar schooling versus when you're teaching virtual school?
So that really would depend on the parent a lot more, but not very frequently, maybe a few times a year in brick and mortar. But through the virtual, even if the parent isn't reaching out to me, I'm reaching out to them at least once a month just to keep them updated on their child's progress.
Interesting. Good to know. So, moving on from the communication aspect of being a teacher, is there anything that surprised you about virtual school that you weren't expecting?
Some of the things that really surprised me was that how much you actually are communicating. So you would think that you are communicating more with teachers and staff, admin, throughout the day, more brick and mortar. But really, once you're in your classroom, for most of those hours, you're just with your students. But with virtually, you're able to have a team meeting instantly. You're able to solve problems as they arise and not have to wait to an after school hours when might be scheduled for like a week or later. So I really like what surprised me and I really liked is that we can hop on together and look at data almost instantly. Or if we notice something across the board on, an assessment, we can meet and talk about those things. And I'm always on Skype or Zoom communicating with other people within Florida Virtual, and everyone is always nice, always helpful. And so those were some of the things that were surprising.
Great. So there's a lot more communication between you and your colleagues, other teachers, and administration at Florida Virtual School. What benefits do the students see because of that?
Well, because of that, they're not waiting for more of that data. And because of our assessments are done digitally, we're able to pull that information much quicker. When I was in brick and mortar, if we are hand scoring those or having to wait to do a Scantron, which most of the younger elementary kids aren't going to be able to do quite yet, you're waiting a long time to get those results and get the data to analyze it, where I'm able to have a kid do something online, have that feedback right away, and then we can really dig into, okay, what standard or what item are they missing the most, and we can address that right away the next day in class time. And so that is something that has been very beneficial for the students, and then also be able to pull one-on-one if needed. If I noticed that a student had trouble that day with a specific standard, and maybe the parent noticed as well, we can schedule a tutoring session for that day if there's some time. If not, the next day, and we're able to really catch them, where if an hour is up in math and brick and mortar, it was time to move on, and we couldn't really provide that one-on-one support unless that was taking up the teacher's lunchtime.
Gotcha. Okay, so moving on to talk a little bit about your full-time elementary program that you're specifically working for. Can you tell us how it's different than the virtual schools in the past?
So with our program on the full-time, we're the full-time side, there is another section of FLVS that's considered the flex, and they're that homeschool option. So really the biggest difference between all the other virtual schools and us is that we are providing that normal brick and mortar schedule. So we are having assignments due weekly. You are having class time that is expected for you to attend. We're taking attendance, and we're really checking in on the students a lot more often. And so it's not really students working on their own, it's us working together with the students and the parents, and it's really taking the three of us together to help them be successful. And I think that's one of the biggest things that stands out, is having that extra accountability with that.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about a experience you've had where you've seen that virtual school was the best option for a student?
Yes. So even with the flex and the full-time, both of these, we see similar types of students that come in, and what really benefits them at FLVS is for students who may have had some trouble in the brick and mortar school. So they might have just been somebody who, they can't sit in their seat. They want to walk around the classroom, but they still want to learn. Well, we'll have students in our class time who will be up and in their rooms, moving around, but they'll have their audio on and they'll come running back to their computer to answer questions or share. And so they're able to move around and get that flexibility that they might need. We've had students who might have processing issues, so they might take a little bit longer, where in brick and mortar they had to just keep going. Where I've had parents who tell me they might pause my live lesson or come back to it later because they're all recorded, whether it's flex or full time, and they can rewatch those lessons. So if they needed to try that problem again, they're able to go back to those lessons at a later time. And so those students really benefit. We have students who are involved in competitive sports, and so their schedule they need to have some more flexibility because they need to have 2-a-day training. So those students really benefit as well. And then just some students, they just really want to try something different, and their parents have said they just want to see how it goes, and they end up just loving the way it's set up. And it might be just because they're commuting an hour to their local brick and mortar school because they live out on a farm area, and so that takes that away from them, and they can just hop on and still see students and communicate and have interactions as well as learn.
Great. Very interesting. So you're teaching live lessons. Is this typical for virtual schools, and is it beneficial to be producing a live lesson for the students?
So a lot of virtual schools are providing live lessons, but they're not always considered something that you are expected to attend in the program. And I think that it is really the most important part of our whole virtual program is attending those live class time lessons. That's where they're really getting to learn the content. It's getting introduced. They're getting to practice it together. And they are able to hear how other students are solving it. So if they're looking through their online modules or textbook, they might see one way to solve it, and then they might be struggling. But when we come together, we're practicing in all different types of ways. So they might learn that, they multiply best by using equal groups, while another student might learn about a number line. And they're learning about all these different ways to solve problems together that maybe just the teacher alone or just the student alone might not even have thought was a strategy. So that is really getting to communicate with the other students is the most beneficial learning part.
Okay, so how would you say teaching a live lesson virtually is the same or different than when you were teaching it in a brick and mortar school?
So it really takes the students actually participating to get the most out of it. There are a lot of programs out there that you can use to have the students, even though they're online, you can see them in live time, what they're working on if they're doing it on the computer. They could even have something as simple as a notebook in front of them if they have a camera to work out their problems and show that. But the hardest part is if they're not having their camera on or they're not logging into the additional, program so I can see them working, I might not know how they're doing at all. So they might kind of slip through the cracks there if they're not participating, because I don't know if that student was understanding the concept or not because I've seen nothing from them. And so that's the hardest part, because at least if I was in the classroom with them, I can see if the student is actively working on the problem. I would say that if you're coming to class time, most students are participating and doing it somewhere, whether it's a whiteboard and a notebook or on an online program, to allow us to see that. But that is just one of the differences there that I noticed.
Okay, so behavior is a common issue in the brick and mortar school. How is behavior an issue in virtual school?
So surprisingly, there are behavior issues that arise online. Some of them could just be if they're in the chat box, keeping the appropriate language and on task in there. And so you might think of that as a student who can't stop talking during class time. So that is, the equivalent of something like that. The great thing that you'll notice is that if students have some type of, they might be angry or upset, they can take that break and decompress if maybe they're not getting and come back to things. And so that type of behavior, we don't have a lot of violent type of behavior because it is online, but you'll still get the chattiness in the participant box. So you really still have to think about your classroom norms and expectations in the beginning of the year and go over those with the students, because those, you want to be able to have a chat box open where students can actively talk about what they're working on and really have that thinking. But if we have students who are always off task or using inappropriate language and you have to turn off your chat box, well, that's also going to affect the overall learning that day. And just you want to make sure that you have appropriate clothes on. I know it's not something that you might think about, but you want to make sure that they have a shirt or clothes on, because they might be thinking they're at home and they might not need to wear clothes, or just even parents walking by in the background who might be in, clothing that wouldn't be appropriate for being on camera.
Okay, so there's different types of behavior issues that you deal with when you're teaching at a virtual school compared to with brick and mortar. But what about the other kids who are behaving correctly? Do these behavior issues affect those students as much as they would in a brick and mortar school?
So overall, the behavior issues that you're going to see virtually are nothing compared to what you would see, obviously in a brick and mortar classroom. if if needed, you can have certain students, you can instantly text or call their parents during class time if they're using the chat box inappropriately. I have been able to send a quick chat to a parent, and then they're able to make sure that that student at home is now doing what they need to, so that hopefully then you can keep that participant chat box open. If you do need to turn off your chat box, though, you always have the option of using microphones and different options like that to still allow them to communicate. Where if you're in brick and mortar and you're having some kind of extreme behavior, that takes over, and you might have to have a classroom. I mean, I've had them evacuate and have to go into another room because of extreme behaviors. And now that class has lost a half an hour to an hour of learning time that week. And so that kind of does put them behind when you add those up throughout the year. They've now lost so many hours of academic learning. So overall, you have less assigned class time virtually, but you really are getting more of that class time because there's no interruptions or breaks throughout throughout the time.
Understood. So what you're saying is there's more instructional time in the virtual setting compared to at a brick and mortar school. So why are parents choosing virtual school?
Many parents are choosing virtual school for one, safety. A lot of parents are feeling afraid to send their little ones into school for the first time with all the violence and, just being scared about things that have been occurring in schools like shootings. And they're just not ready to send their 5-year-old off to kindergarten yet. So that's one of the reasons. Also, things I've had parents talk about how, if their child might be having bullying issues and they have to go to their local public school and maybe that school isn't responding how they would like. A lot of times they'll come to us to get that option. Students that have disabilities or, like we said, ADHD or ADD, and they need to be moving, getting that, they'll come to us. But then parents who live far away, or maybe they live in a farm, or maybe they travel a lot for work and they want to still have their kids with them. So I've had parents a mom told me that the dad travels a lot for work and they want to be able to go with dad and be able to stay at these different places with him across the US. And as long as they were a Florida resident and they would come back, every year, then that was a great option for them to still have their family intact. And so the virtual school worked out very well for parents who need to travel for work, and they can bring their kids with them.
Gotcha. Okay, so for parents that right now are trying to decide should they send their kid to a brick and mortar school or should they send them to virtual school, what should those parents be considering?
Well, right now, I know a lot of parents are wanting to do the virtual distance learning due to COVID, and that's another safety concern that is bringing parents to us right now of high enrollments. They really need to consider, are they able to give that time that the student needs? So are they going to help them with learning the systems and how to upload assignments and how to log in for class? And they might need to give them a little extra support on working on some assignments, to make sure that they're understanding those as well. So if you have a full-time job where you can't separate any hours to help them, it might not be the best option. Now, a lot of times parents will hire somebody who is like a tutor or something like that who can help get those things done. So whether you've got somebody like that or maybe a cousin or even a grandma who stays home with the kids, you just need to have somebody there with extra support. You can't just think that you've signed up for online and now you've signed up and so everything is done, because we're not there to give that extra help of making sure things are where they need to be and how to log into them if they're not there to give that extra support. So that's just something to consider.
I see. So what you're saying is, like anything, the student and the parents are going to get what they put in to the situation. So if they're trying to help their kid be a success, they're going to be a success. Is there anything else you wish parents knew?
I think that they should just know that whether you choose brick and mortar or if you go with a virtual school, both are going to have teachers that are qualified, teachers that are trained. We've both know the standards, we know we're teaching class time, and we're able to provide that one-on-one support where it's needed and when they need it, but they just have to not be afraid to ask questions, let the teacher know any background information, just like they would in brick and mortar, and then just be there to help that communication line stay open, so that way we can just make sure that the students are getting exactly what they need. I'd rather have that student come in and we spend the first week of class time going over things, or them calling me after hours, so that way halfway through the year they're not behind. Because once you start to get behind, it's really hard in any situation to get caught back up and feel successful. And so it's okay to feel overwhelmed in the beginning of virtual school, because anything you do that's brand new, it's going to feel overwhelming, but you have to give it some time. And then once you start to adjust, the virtual school is just as easy to keep up with as brick and mortar.
Great, great. So are there any common misconceptions about virtual school that you would like to address?
I just think that sometimes the brick and mortar teachers think that the virtual teachers aren't doing the same thing as they are, but we are doing the almost exact same things, just we're doing them virtually. We are having faculty meetings, we're looking at data together. We have tier 2, tier 3 support for those students who need it. We are meeting as a team to help push students forward. We have class time. Anything you can think of that you did brick and mortar, we are doing virtually, just the same. It's just we're all at home and having that extra little convenience. And if anything, you feel a little bit more comfortable because you're at home and you can do all these things a little bit more successfully. And you have a little bit of flexibility as well as both the teachers and the students. And that's always nice.
I see. So is it safe to say that there's a little bit of competitiveness between brick and mortar and virtual school teachers?
I don't think it's competitive with each other. I think they just don't know what goes on virtually. It's not always shared as much. And so they're just more curious. Whenever I meet a teacher who finds out I work virtually, they just want to know what's it like, what goes on. And they have tons of questions about how our days might be different or what we're doing. It's more just they don't know.
Gotcha. Okay. So for teachers that are interested in potentially teaching at a virtual school, what would you tell them?
Make sure that you have no problem, being on a camera, because you do spend most of your day being on camera with each other. Just being able to use technology, that's going to be a main point, because there are so many different programs and things that you can utilize to really enhance the learning. So if you are just thinking that you're just going to hop into a Zoom classroom and lecture the students, they're not going to get anything out of that. So really explore all those different, tech tools that you can use out there to get everybody to participate. So be very knowledgeable about technology is going to be an important part, and just keeping yourself open to having communication with everybody.
Gotcha. Okay, so while we wrap up here, I think I want to bring up, in our pre-interview, you mentioned quite an interesting situation you had where a kid was in an unexpected environment during class, but was still able to make it work because they were teaching virtually. Do you know which story I'm referring to?
I'm not positive.
It has to do with summertime and the water outside, maybe a pool.
Yeah, so that goes into the students can literally be anywhere to learn, which is one of the benefits. I had a student before who was in the pool swimming, but he had his laptop over on the edge and he was just kind of there too. And he was listening and participating, and we played a Kahoot, which is like a quiz type online, and he actually ended up winning our Kahoot game. But during his video was on, so we could see him, in the pool there, but he was still learning and participating. So it really opens up for students to be anywhere and anytime they want to learn. We have students who are sitting outside, they're inside, they're working from all different environments, and it's a really cool way to engage with them. And they're excited about learning because they're not just stuck in their desk in their classroom.
So I think, that story answers my next question, but I think you could still add on to it, and that is, do students enjoy virtual school?
Most students, like anything, you can't say that everybody's going to enjoy it, right? It does depend on the student, but overall, the students really do enjoy that virtual engagement, especially if it's somebody who was going to be doing the homeschool option, because now they're getting to communicate with their peers. They really like it, and you would think that they would be wanting class time to end, but just for example, at the end of my summer reading camp, I thought the students were going to be so excited to start their summer vacation because now they were already doing an extra few weeks of school to help with their reading, but they were all really sad about ending class time and having the month off. They were all in the chat box and on the camera sad about leaving each other because this is their time that they really get to hang out and learn, and we all kind of form a close bond because we're always on camera together, and they can just share those different experiences. So overall, the students really like it. They like having the flexibility. They're always telling me about different things that they're doing in addition to being a virtual school student, and everybody's stories are always different, what brings them, and so it's really cool to see that.
Great. Well, I think that's a great spot to leave it. Thank you, Christiane, for sharing your experience at Florida Virtual School, also known as FLVS, where you've been helping students distance learn for the past couple years, and you're going to be continuing to do so. I'm looking forward to speaking with you again. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.